Hello and welcome to Recyclist. I'm your host, Eric Provost, and I am incredibly excited today. I'm being joined by a very special guest. He's the CEO and co founder of Murray Yeatman Distillery over in the UK. Please help me welcome to the show right now, Mr. Rob Murray. Thank you so much for joining me today, sir.
Thanks, Eric. It's lovely to be here and really looking forward to talking to you about what we've been up to recently.
I appreciate you coming in and talking to me in the middle of a massive heat wave, apparently, you guys have in the UK currently, right?
Well, it's a mini heat wave more than that. I mean, in the UK, of course, heat waves aren't really heat waves, but compared to when I was in Florida a couple of years ago, and it was like well over 100 degrees. Here, though, we don't have air conditioning, so it's roasting. It's very hot.
Uh, but for those who may not be familiar with your distillery and what with Murray Yeatman does, could you please kind of explain what the company is and what you guys do?
Sure. So we are primarily a contract distillery. So we make many different products for many different brands and for independent retailers. And it could be, say, Thunder Toffee Vodka, which we manufacture, which actually, ironically, will be coming to the States very soon. But we also make for the supermarkets, sort of gins, rums, vodkas. We have made soju previously in the past, but we're really renowned for being more of an innovative distiller. So whilst we have our standard brands, for better of a phrase, where it could just be a plain vodka, we like to create different and more wonderful flavors, a bit more like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but not chocolate, such as crisp flavored vodkas. So we made a roast beef, a roast chicken, and a smoky bacon flavored vodka once for a client, and we still sell those to date. So it's doing the different ways of in flavor infusions. It could just be all the way through to different ways of manufacturing and making different alcohols.
How did you really kind of go down that business path? I was like, you know what, gin, vodka, rum. There's something that's missing from it. You know what that is? Roast beef. How do you how do you start going down that career path? Where does this idea for this flavor infused alcohol come from?
So I can't claim that it was my idea, but we manufactured something a product already for this client, and he said to me, he said, "Do you know, I really wanted to make savoury flavoured alcohol." I was, right. He said, "And I really wanted to make crisps, potato chips sort of flavoured." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, what sort of thing do you have in mind?" He said, "Well, like your roast beef, your roast chicken and things." I said, "Oh, okay." That was on the Thursday. A week later, I contacted him and I said, "I've done it, by the way. So you better pop down and come and have a look," because he only lives about 45 minutes away from the main site. And and he said, "You've done what?" I said, "I made your savoury flavoured vodkas," and he couldn't believe it. And it was just when he explained it to me, and I thought, well, do you know what? Everybody has done, or I say everybody, but there are plenty of sweet, shall we say, flavored vodkas. It could be pineapple, it could be whatever it may be,
Of course,
um,
yeah.
and trying that. So, I mean, whilst we only ever released, and they currently are out there in the UK and they're available on Amazon and things, we released the smoky bacon, roast chicken, and the roast beef. We also made wasabi, scampi fries. I can't remember the other ones now, but I mean, scampi fries is really a UK pub beverage, and you'd think fish flavored vodka would be revolting, but it's not, because it is really like drinking a bag of crisps or a savoury snack. It's bizarre, but and of course it's entirely vegan, which is even more hysterical when you say it's crisp flavoured vodka that's vegan. Um, so I know, but it's things like that that really interest us as a company, trying to find different things, different ways, different enticements, I suppose, to people and their palates, and then what they can do with them. I mean, when you talk about the flavored vodkas, um, uh, uh, actually the crazy part was how many bartenders are now using it in things like Bloody Marys, because beef vodka and a Bloody Mary really, forgive the pun, beefs out the drink. You know, it really makes it
That's
sort of
interesting.
thing. I know, and we've got restaurants that use it as a digestif, so it's served with, you know, sort of after your meal, between your dessert, or it's served with it, and it's bizarre. And I think it's one thing for us doing the creative part of creating the beverage, but it's then the next step of seeing as to what others do to then take it to the next sort of stage and how they implement it within their own setting.
That is so unbelievably fascinating. I wouldn't have even considered that. I'm perfectly happy just, drawing myself a glass of whiskey or something and just enjoying that straight. But to like the Bloody Mary thing, I think is incredibly interesting. The digestate that you were just talking, I think that's really, really cool. So, I mean, just beyond the fascinating aspect of creating drinkable alcoholic roast beef, to see what people can do with it beyond that, I think uh, let people know where they can see stuff like this for themselves and possibly even pick up a bottle or two uh, of these different savory flavored alcohols and the rest of your products that you're talking about.
So most things are available, obviously in the UK, but are also on Amazon. So you can get it from our own website, which is murrayyeatman.com. Um, and yeah, and so you can get it there. Those things we've never got an FDA approved, so they're not available in the States currently. But nonetheless, but it's interesting that we're talking about all of this, but it's moving, I suppose, back to why we're here, which is whilst we've done everything that we can do for sort of developing different flavors of people, what we've always been doing in the background is trying to create this other beverage that we're here to talk about, the Realizzato.
Yes, exactly. Well, we could very easily sit here and talk about the rest of your products
Yeah,
for hours, but I think people are wondering, you know, this is Recyclist. You guys talk about, waste and
not
energy
roast
and
beef.
gas, and yeah, it's like this company sounds amazing, but why are you guys talking to them? Well, it turns out the reason I was turned on to your guys' company in the first place was, like you just said, this fascinating product and process that we are here to talk about, the Realizzato. You are already endearing yourselves quite well to an American audience with all the alcohol. However, you are doubling down on that by combining it with coffee. Matter of fact, I'm finishing up a cup right now. Um, so
Absolutely.
just on face value, this is a an alcoholic coffee liqueur, but the way that you guys create it, the process that it goes through to come to fruition is absolutely fascinating. Rob, could you please kind of take us through this Realizzato journey?
Sure. So it originally began in 2014 when we at Murray Yeatman read a peer reviewed paper where some gentlemen at a university had tested whether you could get to the fermentable sugars within inside spent coffee ground. Now, I don't know if you know this, but essentially all uh, plant matter consists of tightly knitted sugar cells, which are then held together by a hemicellulose and protected by a lignin. And these guys had tested out an experiment, but the method was slightly flawed because they'd actually added sugar to it. So whilst they were trying to see if they could ferment the coffee ground, they actually were fermenting the sugar. But when we looked at the results, the yield was physically better than if you were just fermenting solely sugar. And when we looked at their process, we went, well, that's great. So, but they did it via a sort of a steam explosion, which in an industrial or a commercial distillery, you don't really want to be doing steam explosion. So we then went down the rabbit hole with Alice and saw how far we could go, and started looking at, can we make alcohol, regardless as to what type of flavor at that time, but can we make alcohol that is food safe and solely made out of spent coffee ground?
A
And
spent
what
coffee
journey it
ground. That's
was.
the amazing thing to me. Is these are coffee grounds that have already produced coffee. Every other
Yeah.
place in the world, this would be in the trash. This would be considered already waste, already trash. But you guys have found a use for this to continue creating products from it. That is incredible to me.
So that's the thing, isn't it? When we started this, of course, the coffee ground is, and if you take in the UK, Costa Coffee is our major franchise, um, and they actually produce about 15 kgs or kilograms per day in each of the stores. That's about 240 tons of coffee ground per day. And if you actually put it into the UK, there's 98 million cups sold, which is about 1.3, sorry, 1,370 tons a day. In the States, you produce about 4,400 tons per day.
That sounds
So
about right.
yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And you certainly do love your coffee. So I can't speak for the States, but in the UK, most of that sadly ends up going to landfill. Which, as we know, when it's put in bulk, a small amount being spread across your garden to keep away, pests and things like rodents. Yeah, that's fine. But when you have a bulk mass together, it actually starts to let off methane, and methane, of course, is much more harmful to the atmosphere than CO2 is. Is it 22 times? Forgive me if I'm wrong in that. I think it's about 22 times as potent. But when you actually look at it, for every ton that goes into landfill, it creates a ton of CO2 every year. And thinking about what we could do with it rather than it just ending up in landfill was really where our brain went with the coffee.
So, do you actually have a partnership with that coffee brand you talked about, or how do you wind up collecting all these spent coffee grounds for your products?
So we have a waste carrier that we work in partnership with called Recora, and they do the collections. So most of our coffee grounds that we use at the moment come from the sort of southeastern London area of England, all the way from London down to Brighton, and sort of covering that sort of Kent, Sussex, Surrey area. And they are collected by Recora and then bring them to us. Legislation reasons, we can't collect waste ourselves. We have to have a waste carrier, so we work in partnership with them, which is good. When that then comes in, of course, we process it and make it food safe, which we can talk about a bit more in a bit. But yeah, but using those as a partner because we wouldn't have the infrastructure to get around all of those different stores every day. We are talking with Costa about what we can do with those, and we are looking to take over collecting from quite a few of those. But there's many different places. We've got major supermarkets in the UK that have asked us to look at taking their coffee grounds, and seeing seeing what we can do with them to partner up. Um, yeah.
And I'm actually looking on your website right now at the incredibly involved process that creating the Realizzato goes through. It goes through a pre-treatment process. You guys have what you call a special hydrolysis process. It goes through actually three separate distillations: the fermentation, the blending, the bottling, and everything. Well, it doesn't feel necessarily very cost efficient to make something like this. It feels like it was a pretty involved process, even figuring out how to do this.
Well, I think that was the difference, though. We needed to make sure when we created this and the final process. So I suppose let me take it back one step. Bear with me. We had to make sure three things. We had to make sure it's food safe because we didn't, we're taking a waste product. We have to make sure that it is not going to poison people
Exactly.
or our staff whilst manufacturing it. We had to make sure that it was cost efficient. We had to make sure that it was energy efficient because there is no point in us as a company sit here and say we've created the first ever sustainable alcohol, but we're using more energy than any other alcohol ever produced in the history of the world. So that was the thing. So when I spoke earlier about the sort of steam explosion, it's very good. It's a really effective way of potentially doing it, but the amount of energy you would use is pointless. So we had to work out a way. Now, what it is the process is when we talk about the hydrolysis stage, it
Yeah.
actually goes. It actually that the sort of the pre-treatment. Before we do anything. the coffee ground has to be come in, it has to be dried because otherwise it's starting to start creating mold, and then we have to sterilize it, and then we get into the pre-treatment. So there's even more before we actually sort of mention it on the website. And the pre-treatment stage is actually three different stages within in there. Now, I'm not going to divulge what they are because that's the trade secret, as I'm sure you can imagine. Um,
Of
but, but
course.
but but what I will say is that we had to make sure that that was really energy light, if using any at all. Some of it we don't, and we have to, but what it is timely. It takes time. I've sort of coined the phrase with it of saying we're waiting for nature to undo itself, because that is essentially what we're doing. We're having to break down that matter to reverse it, for better a phrase. So yeah, but it was trying to tick all those three boxes: the making sure we're not harmful to people or staff, making sure that we're keeping it energy efficient, and making sure that it was not going to cost the earth to be able to do it, because otherwise there would be no point. And I think, sorry, I get really ongoing on talks with rants.
No, 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 no.
Um,
Please, like I said, I find all this absolutely fascinating because from my aspect, obviously, we work so much with waste processing, and we think about terms in terms of creating byproducts like renewable natural gas out of waste or methane or landfill byproducts or something like this. But you guys have effectively combined a an alcohol fermentation and creation process with a more kind of new wave waste processing process that we are seeing in a lot of landfills and recycling centers across the country. It's two wildly different things that have seemingly created this perfect marriage, which I find so incredibly interesting.
it's very kind of you to say. I think that it is the making sure that we thought differently, and none of us here are actually what I would define as a scientist, although I've been called that now. We're not formally educated in that, and all I can say is that after essentially, that article came out in 2014, so essentially 10, 11 years of keeping my mouth stum, not saying anything, and now being able to talk about it, I definitely get on a rant of excitement when discussing it, because there's been so many trials and tribulations. Even when we go back to when we first took our first sample, we'd said, right, we're not going to go and spend a lot of money on this. Let's figure it out. And we bought the most basic equipment that we could to be able just to see, can we get to the point of we can see any kind of sugar, let alone if it's fermentable. Can we see if we can get a sugar yield back? And back then we were using, eye-sighted bricks meters and everything else, to be able to see if it was there. And then from there, it's gone through many, many different changes, some which have not gone very well, some which have gone very well, and redefining. And even if as I sit here today talking to you now, and I know we still haven't finished. We still have more to do. We know that we only get about an 80% efficiency. I want more. I would like that to be more like 95. I mean, we're never going to get to 100. That's a perfectly perfect world which we don't live in. But I would like to get more out of it when it comes to the sugar yield, and how much alcohol we can produce out of every gram of coffee ground.
And you guys have really leaned into, I mean, obviously the coffee grounds are recycled and used, but the entire process is using recycled products, even in the bottling and the labeling and the boxing, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So again, going back to it would be hypocritical to then use an heavy process. Exactly that. What would have been the point in saying, here is a fully recycled alcohol, for better a phrase, and now we're going to put it into a brand new glass bottle with a brand new label. So yes, so we spoke to glass manufacturers and bottle manufacturers and said, can we have a fully recycled glass bottle? I was amazed how many times I was told no. I'm not going to lie. That I thought that would be a real easy thing to do. Yet we did manage to find one particular company that was up to the challenge. So kudos to them for being able to do so. And then when we spoke to our label suppliers, and I said, can you find me a fully recycled paper? When I first brought this up with them, there was no such thing on the market. Now, thankfully, it has now come, and we were able to be able to find that. Um, I mean, we've even looked at the extent of, sorry, just to recap. So the bottle, the label, the box, everything is recycled. The stoppers, we even asked at one point, can we, because the stoppers are recycled, but we actually asked, could we have those made out of the coffee ground? And the team is still working on that over in Italy, the manufacturers. Can we have the top? So the shank that goes in the bottle, of course, needs to be food safe. So that would be made out of the recycled material that currently exists. But the actual
Yeah,
bit on
you're
top.
talking about the stopper that would like historically be made out of cork, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that it's not made out of cork now, but they're known as a T top. So the sort of a shape of a T if you pull it out. So you've got like
yeah.
a cork rim, sorry, a wooden rim normally, and then the shank that goes into the bottle. So the shank will still be the recycled material which we can get, but the top we're hoping we can actually make out of the coffee ground, the spare coffee ground that we have, if that makes sense. So it's looking at all sorts of different angles. The only thing that I had to, I suppose, give up on, for better a phrase, was the glue. We decided that when they said to us, we can get you recycled glue, however, it would require bespoke machinery that would wet the label first before applying it to the bottle. And I looked at the costs of it, the manufacturing, and everything else that was going to go into it, buying the machinery. What I worked out was that our CO2 footprint sort of equivalent for buying and doing all that, it would take about a 300-year payback period. I was like, well, there's no point. We'll just stay with standard glue because 300 years is a long time to try and make it back. When you talk about how much more CO2 you create in doing so.
And I'm also really interested throughout the process. This is such a unique, path to go down when it comes to recycling any type of waste and all of these different processes that you have to go through. How many of these steps did you actually have to, even if you didn't have to fully rebuild from the ground up to support your vision, how many of them did you have to kind of shift around or rejig some things or even fabricate entire new parts or parts of the process in order to figure this whole thing out?
I mean, that is truly, it would be an unknown number on the basis of there was so many variants. I mean, when we had the first sort of stages in the process, um, we even if you just take the drying, we assessed whether drying the coffee ground was required, whether we could just process it instantly. So it comes in, it's been collected from the shop the day before, it comes into here, it gets processed. Can we do that? Would that work on a mass scale? How quickly does mold grow? We tested how fast that was, what kind of mold it was, everything. So, but when you talk about that, I mean, we checked whether we needed to grind it down, how far we needed to grind it down. Do we need to make it more like a flour and things? And we then tested every variant of that. So we ended up with our sort of base route, if you want to call it for better phrase, so step one. And
Hmm.
let's say that we ended up with about 6 steps or 10 variations, 6 to 10 variations of that. And then we had the next step in that, and then we had another 10. So it's the multiples and the multiples and the multiples. And we tested every single one for efficiency to see. Um, and we still there is one point that we still don't know whether it's required or necessary, but we're too scared to remove it and test because of it delaying production now. um, but we will give it a go just in the sort of the smaller batches upstairs in the lab. But it's so many. I honestly, it's countless. And I mean, even today, they're doing samplings today of different variations because we've got to a point that we're happy with to be able to show it to the world and tell everybody.
Hmm.
But there's still more to do. And then there's also the what other plant matters can we ferment? Um,
See, yeah,
you know,
exactly. That's the thing is you've kind of opened Pandora's box, I feel like. Pioneering may seem like a hyperbolic word, but this is a really fascinating path to go down, especially with waste products. And I've got to imagine that's just kind of the logical next step is okay, we've succeeded with
Yep.
coffee grounds. What else is possible?
Well, we know that essentially any plant matter would work. We did test it on certain things like I mean our cardboard we make into a crude alcohol, and when I say that, it's not for consumption, even though we could refine it because we use it for cleaning. So we ferment our cardboard and turn it into a cleaning material, and things. We also know that we could do it. We took some it was a broken pallet one day, and we decided, let's test the process. Let's grind down the broken pallet into literally a fine dust and give it a go. It worked. It wasn't the best, but for a first attempt, we took it as a win, because we just thought, what can we do? And ultimately, it's the next steps from here as well as to when we make the product. The volume of the solid matter is reduced by about 80%, give or take. What could we do with the residual 20%? We now know that if we dry it out, we can actually put it into a biomass generator and burn for power. So we could actually use the coffee ground that comes in. It can make people's cups of coffee. It can come to us. We can then um, change it onto into Realizzato, and then we can take that matter to power the next batch, and so on and so forth.
So even with this process, you're creating additional byproducts.
Potentially, yeah, yeah, yeah. Just the small amount of residue that's left. Yeah, yeah.
Wonderful. I would imagine kind of the logical next step from something like this is there's another beverage very famous in the UK that comes from, you know, water and plant matter particulates. Have you guys thought about maybe some type of tea variant of the Realizzato?
So yeah, absolutely. The tea leaves could be used, but the tea leaves are not as such an abundant waste.
Hmm.
Um, you know, not. I mean, there is a lot produced, but the coffee grounds are what's been tested more. The issue that we would have with tea leaves, of course, is that most of it is in bags. So then, then you've got to ask yourself, are the bags fermentable? That would be the next step. Can we convert the bags? Because they'll be made out of a plant matter, probably paper of some format. Could they be done? I don't know. It's whatever the next steps will be as to what we go to next. It'll certainly be interesting to find out. That's for sure.
I am interested. I'm sure that that would require a lot more variation when it comes to a lot of the machines and processes that you guys already have in place. When it comes to just the hydrolysis process, the fermentation, the pre-treatment process that we've already talked about, were the kind of commercially available machines and systems available, did they work well enough for you guys, or did you find yourselves having to customize a lot of the machinery and processes to fit the Realizzato process?
The latter, we had to do a lot of adaptations to machinery. I mean, one part of the process during when we're doing the sterilization, we also incorporate one of the first pre-treatments, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. Um, that was more for efficiency to as well. Trying to work out, well, hang on, it's already doing X. Can we incorporate Y? And that certainly explaining that to the manufacturers of those machines and telling them, we need to adapt it to be able to do this. As in, can you add this extra part, change it slightly? We needed to be able to. I mean, one of the hardest things was trying to find ways to drain stuff. That
Really?
was honestly, well, because when once you start separating out the sugars, it becomes quite a lot more sticky and viscous. And yeah, saying to somebody, well, what we need it to have a bigger, thicker 4 inch, 6 inch drain, whatever it may be. And trying to explain to them why without telling them, a bit like me trying to explain to you now why without telling you. Um, it's it's a lot more trickier than you might think. Now, those manufacturers have their eureka moment now because now they know. They're like, oh, that's what they were up to for all this time, and things. So it was, yeah, adapting the machinery. We first of all started just with off the shelf bought stuff, and of course we would. I mean, the first batches were essentially made in apologize, less than microbrewery, like home brewing stuff. We bought small 12-liter machines. We tested them. We only had 500 ml machines. By the time that we would finish, we'd end up with like a 500 ml sample. We would test that to see what the yield was. Um, and yeah, working those bits out and on a smaller scale. But then when you move them up to the larger scale, we expected rather rather in error or erroneously is a good word to use. We expected it to sort of just go up in a linear line. No, some things went up in a curve where they raised, and some things went down in a curve. So we found that we had to change the values of some of the parts that we were using, or the temperatures or the times, that they were vastly different to what they were when we would do, say, a 500 ml sample to a 5 litre to a 25 litre to 1,000. And we still have some of those sort of things today where when we measure the return and we go, well, the yield is, let's say, 10% less than we were expecting. We then have to look at all the different measurements to see, right, at what stage did that change? Why would that be? Because we're still, I mean, we've got a robust process, but making sure that we're monitoring it so that we can make it efficient every time is absolutely key.
Yeah. And you guys are getting an amazing, fascinating product out of it. But um, obviously, going through so much work and spending so much money to create all this, just to essentially recycle coffee grounds, kind of do something environmentally conscious and to protect the planet. Was that something on your guys' mind the whole time while you were doing this?
I think it's more about thinking differently. The alcohol, I'm being very generic here, but the alcohol industry as a whole, especially the spirits industry,
Yeah.
is very energy heavy. It's very wasteful, and if you how many glass bottles are made where, I mean, this is a hypothetical question because I couldn't even tell you the answer, but how many glass bottles are made where it uses new glass and they're just thrown away? They may be recycled again afterwards, but how many? Who knows? And it's all that new use, and trying to think of a different way of ensuring that we are as sustainable as we can in our end product. As a distillery, we're very mindful of our waste as general, but thinking about it as what else can we do? I mean, I am a firm believer that we have really one thing that we should do, and it's make sure that we leave this world in a better place and state than the way that we found it. Um, would I say that that was the sole motivation behind this? Absolutely no. I can't deny that it became well, my wife would probably call it a full ADHD 10-year motion. So, um, what did she call them? Side quests. You know,
Your wife a big
it's
gamer?
no, she's not. She's a lawyer, but she certainly is. She likes the lingo, that's for certain. But it is that it was just trying to find a different way of doing things, especially in this day and age where we can make a difference if we try. And
Yeah.
actually, without trying to blow my own trumpet here, being able to prove that it could be done without spending vast sums of money, without spending vast sums of energy to be able to do it. It's quite an achievement. I
Yeah.
sound a bit more like a megalomaniac there, don't I? But anyway,
Well,
it,
it's an
yeah.
achievement that hasn't come without a few trials and tribulations, but um, we've had a conversation and seems like you guys are coming out the backside of something pretty challenging. Uh, but you guys are kind of making lemonade out of lemons from a recent let's just call it a tribulation that you guys had.
Yes, it's been an interesting period. We unfortunately, with designing certain machinery also means that you have certain troubles. And unfortunately, one of the tanks actually overpressured and burst, which meant that we ended up having a distillery full of fermenting alcohol, and in turn. It caused a lot of pressure, and the splashing came out, and it got into the electrics of the stills, and we had to get new wiring looms sorted. All of this 3 days before we had a parliamentary visit because we had the deputy speaker from the UK Parliament coming. So we were frantically cleaning, scrubbing, doing everything as much as we can. It was all hands to the deck. But what was so good about that, if to say to use a better word, was that we had foreseen as much as we could. We knew what the problems would be, and we knew how we could get back up and running as fast as possible. So I had to jump in the car myself and drive all the way up to Oxford and back to pick up some bits, which is, it's all hands to the decks. And the team here at Murray Yeatman, we are essentially a family, and it's that whole right. It's happened. Let's get on with it. Let's fix the problem. Let's have a quick look about what adaptations we might need to make to the machinery to make sure it doesn't happen again. Thankfully, we found out that it wasn't going to be too much, so we got that fixed as fast as possible, and got ourselves back up and running. But we're innovating. Things happen. You can't
Yeah,
do anything about it.
yeah, but it sounds like just this has already produced, talks, discussions, and analysis that have already tangibly made the process better.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, obviously, any company's going to go through highs and lows, and interesting. But I did think that was, really cool. The fact that you took that and have already created a better product from it, even just in the short time since it's happened.
Absolutely. And I think that when it comes back to the sort of coffee ground, we wanted to see if it was possible to be able to actually make what we believe is the first ever real coffee liqueur. I mean, the existing coffee liqueurs out there are either rum or vodka based with coffee flavoring or something made on top of it. This is the first ever one made from coffee. So arguably it is the real coffee liqueur, which is quite nice. And it goes back to that thinking differently, working out things differently, creating something new. And it doesn't matter if it's the process or if it's the product. It's the whole sort of picture as to what we can do as a company to carry on innovating and making making these wonderful products.
Well, it's alcohol, it's coffee, it supports the environment. I'm going to need an entire case, clearly. Uh, but for people out there who are kind of interested in the process side of it, have you guys published any? I'm looking at your website and it has a bit of an overview. But for anybody interested in maybe taking some of the ideas that you guys have had and adapting it to some ideas that they may be having, maybe not even in terms of foodstuff production, but expanding the thought process behind what's possible with waste products. What kind of information would you point people toward?
So we learned a lot, and from reading some peer review papers. I wouldn't want to disclose exactly how we've done it for the moment because it may not be a perfectly perfect system, but it works for us at this moment in time. But one of the things is that yes, we've managed to get to the point that we had. I googled, and so did my business partner Jamie, hundreds of different variations and different papers as to the way that people had processed coffee ground to either create biofuel, biodiesel, whatever it is, only in a laboratory state, or a university or something like that, and then took those and said, right, how can we adapt what bit's good, what bit would work for us on a commercial scale, what wouldn't, and tried them, and we would sit there. My Jamie, my co-director, and myself, we actually are next door neighbours as well, and we would spend hours sitting in the hot tub in my back garden talking about this whilst drinking whiskey. It was a fabulous time. I can't deny that. But it was reading those papers and finding different ways that other people had looked at it. It's not been necessarily solely our effort. Without those things to reference, we never could have done what we've done.
Hopefully we've interested a lot of people in checking out your products. Again, where can they find everything that you guys produce and sell and create?
So murrayyeatman.com is the easiest place to be able to see everything. If they want to see Realizzato in more detail about that, it is realizzato.co.uk. what I would say is that if there are any people out there that want to get in touch with us, we are more than happy to have conversations about collaborating together, and seeing what we can do. Um, as I said earlier, making sure that we do something where we leave this world in a better place than the way that we found it. I think it's something that we all should be doing. So,
Agreed.
by all means, if they want to get in touch, they're more than welcome to. I won't say which country, but one particular country has already said to us, can you please come and build a facility in our country and start manufacturing our coffee ground?
There you
Um,
go.
I know, and I've said, well, let me deal with the UK first and get this all finally sorted. But I'm more than happy to have conversations, because if we can, I mean, look, at this moment in time, we can take as much coffee ground as we can, but we can't process it all to be able to make an alcoholic beverage. But for anybody that knows anything about distilling, um, if we can make a 20% beverage, we can make 100% alcohol if we have the right equipment. And if you can do that, you could potentially turn all of the coffee ground in the world if you wanted to go that crazy. But you could turn it all into a bioethanol, which, if it's pure enough, could be used in fuel and gasoline and things like that. Because gasoline, I don't know if it's the same in the States. In the UK, we have 5 and 10% dilution with ethanol to gasoline. I don't know if it's the same over there. I assume that it will be. So you could be using it for that, as another form of biofuel.
And for everybody that's interested, Murray Yeatman, Murray Murray, Yeatman Yeatman, and the Realizzato is Realizzato.
That's correct. Yeah.
Rob, thank you so much for joining me today. Again, I was turned on to this product. I was immediately fascinated with it. I had stars in my eyes. I think this is so cool. Again, you're combining basically the two most popular drinks in America, while protecting the environment. I think that's incredible what you guys are doing, and good luck in the future continuing to build on both Murray Yeatman as a distillery and the Realizzato.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here.
Wonderful. And to all of our listeners, after you check out everything that they are doing over there, if you would do me a favor and make sure to check out Diamond Scientific. They are the company that helps make Recyclist possible. You can check them out online right now at diamondsci.com. That's diamondsci.com. Or you can even set up a personalized presentation just by calling 321 223 7500. Once again, I've been your host, Eric Provost, and we will see you back here next week for another brand new episode of Recyclist. Thank you.